Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Podcasting. Podcasting. Okay. What's up, guys? Four Corners back with an off-season episode. I am one half of today's show, Ray. You can find me online at Ray Von Hackshaw. I'm the best bowler you know. If you'd like to find out about that, you can check out my personal YouTube. I do YouTube shorts of me bowling at Ray Von Hackshaw. You can also find me on Twitter at the same location. The other half of my illustrious program I have for you, Peter, now on land, live and direct, Bucket since '88. What's going on?
What's up, Ray? Basketball season is still going. I got back just in time to watch a few more games. Unfortunately, Nugget season is not still going, but
No.
podcasting is a year-round sport for us.
Yes, debates and verbal jousting never dies. For sure, for sure.
Right.
So it's been a minute. We have a lot we could get into. I guess I want to start off with this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointing would you say this season has been for the Nuggets?
Wow. I guess so. When you talk about disappointment, I think it all has to come down to perspective and expectations, right? So I kind of got the sense from Nuggets Twitter that most people expected us to be really good this year. And for some reason, I just didn't. I didn't think that. I knew the Stars would be good. I knew they'd win 50 games. They barely got there, but I think about halfway through the season, most realistic Nuggets fans were like, "This team's probably a second round exit," and that's exactly what happened. But I will go super early to my football analogy bag and say that, if I look at the Nuggets Thunder series as a whole, I looked at it going into the series. I want to say the Thunder were like a minus 800 favorite or something. I don't know, like crazy favorites, right? You ever go into a wild card weekend in the NFL and you're like, if your team's on the road and they're playing the 1 seed and you're favored to lose by you're expected to lose by 16 points, right? And you're just kind of like, man, I just hope my team plays well. I just, maybe we can pull the upset, but I'm really just hoping we don't get blown out here. Then the game starts, you kind of get a few scores, maybe, you get a turnover or two, and then all of a sudden it's the fourth quarter. It's like a 1-score game. You're right in it. You might even have the lead. And then the 1 seed ends up pulling it out at the end. Everybody expected them to win, but you still feel bad, right? You still once the expectations are sort of to the side and you're in it, you want to win it, right? So it's I kind of expected the Thunder to take care of the Nuggets in 5, maybe 6 games. But once we won game 3, I was like, oh my God, we can do this. And then, just to see the back-to-back collapses in game 4 and game 5 was just so disheartening. I thought the series was over at that point, but they fought really hard. They won game 6 at home to force a game 7. And then they just kind of ran out of gas. They had injuries, but it was good to see the fight. So I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, my disappointment is only it's a 4 or a 5. I didn't feel I guess, I mean, you guys know my position. I don't look at the Nuggets as championship or bust, even though I guess I'm supposed to. I mean, I've said this before. Only 8 teams in the NBA win a playoff series every year. The Nuggets are still in that. They got out of the first round. Everybody was picking the Clippers. I had fun that series. The Nuggets, they pushed OKC to 7. We'll see what happens in the finals, but I feel like they're right there. The shame is obviously that Booth wasn't able to get any bench pieces for us, but I still like the core of this team. And, everything we hear is that they're going to run it back, which people have mixed feelings about, and we'll talk about. But, I'm really not that disappointed the way the season ended, because as much as people were surprised about the Malone firing, it really did end up giving the team a boost. So, in a weird way, I thought the season kind of ended on a high note compared to what the vibes were going into the last week of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel where you're coming from. I would even say myself that kind of like, when I was living back in Maryland, I had a long commute when I would work in DC. I'd have drive 75 minutes if there's no traffic. And some days there would be traffic, and you're like, oh, this might be a 2 hour venture. And then you get home in like 90 minutes. And you know what? You're like, okay, it wasn't that what it could have been worse. And that's kind of how I feel about the Nugget season is that like when I think about all the things that didn't go as well as they could have from just like the beef as a whole. I'm just gonna say the beef as a whole, right? The personal aspects of it, the implications that it had in like just on the players. I just don't think the players had a good time either, and I think they easily could have um, kind of clocked out and said, "We'll see you next year." Russell Westbrook, I think everybody kind of like, oh, this could be volatile. Not that volatile, pretty consistent. Not a lot of interpersonal conflict among the players. I think that's really big. Like maybe Malone lost the locker room, but like the locker room didn't lose itself. And
Right.
I think
It
that means a
didn't
lot.
like turn anybody against each other. It was more like they just collectively got sick of him.
Yeah. And I know Malone has a lot of defenders, and I'll also say this. I feel like Michael Mullins, I still think he's a good coach, just not a great coach. Like I wanted him to be tier one, and I feel like he's like tier two, if that makes
Well,
sense.
yeah, I mean, we've talked about Malone for years, right? Like he's got strengths and weaknesses. I don't want to take credit for this because a lot of other people have said this, but Malone was probably the perfect coach for this group at the beginning, and like building them up as NBA players in the culture. And now that they've won, it's kind of like they don't really need the pep talk guy anymore. They actually do need more of like a strategist and somebody who's not going to have so much favoritism as Malone does. And I think you really saw that with Adelman. Like there was the one game where Westbrook was awful, and he just pulled him. Right, he wasn't afraid to be like, you don't have it tonight. I don't think Malone always did that, and so that's like a really two-sided coin, right? Because on the one hand, I think Malone trusting his guys really paid dividends early on. With my prime example always being the very first playoff series this group had, the Spurs, where Jamal was awful for the first 7 quarters, didn't get benched, and then explodes in the fourth quarter. Like he really needed to have that breakthrough for himself to kind of like level up to become that good playoff player that we know. And so I think that's kind of like Malone's weak spot, right? It's like he's loyal to a fault. Um, and he trusts the veterans, which is like I get it, but I think Adelman, showed in his brief time that we got to see him that he's more willing to change when things aren't working. And I think the best example of that was game 4 of the Clippers series, right? I mean, the Nuggets got blowed out in game 3. It was looking rough. And then he comes out and has like a completely different game plan midway through the series. And that game ended up flipping that series. So I'll be honest, I was extremely skeptical of Adelman to take over, but what I've seen so far, I've liked.
Yeah, I think so. I even this I think what I'm about to say, I'm kind of preface with the fact that I'm a player. I played basketball, and most of my experience with the game, like in an organized fashion, has been on that side of things. Um, Not that I've never met coaches or interacted with them outside of, being coached by them, but I think there's a certain kind of tone that Michael Malone has that also like worked really well when the guys were like 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, and they're
Yeah.
kind of working their way into being not just basketball players, but also like adults, like men. And I think one of the things you see with coaches that are really highly tenured 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, is that they're like reinventing themselves. I think more often than not, at least not
Yeah,
every year,
you have
but
to.
every so often. And I think that's something I think Malone was kind of getting there a little bit. I think he grew in some ways, but not fast enough. And maybe that's like a hallmark of like he made the adjustment, but maybe not as fast as you'd like. And I think that war on, Grace mentioned like the shitty vibes going into the season. I think some of that is just like, hey, I'm 29, I'm 30 years old, I'm 28, and you're yelling at me like I'm some type of, you know, child. And I think there's some degree to which they kind of emotionally tuned out, even though I also do think what you said is very important in that his decision making as well, like the faith you have in your players can also be such a driver for that growth. And there's probably a degree to which like that faith is not translating to certain players on the roster either.
Well, and that's an interesting point because I think, when a coach wins a championship, it does a few things for them, right? One, it validates them. Two, it gives them confidence, like even more than they already had. But I think three, what it kind of does is not only validates them from like a stamp of approval, like you can't deny the stats aspect, but also like oh, I'm doing this the right way aspect. And it might cover up some of your deficiencies, especially we've talked about like Malone doesn't really maybe get the shine around the league as some of the other coaches because people just say, oh, well, he has Jokic. And so I think sometimes when stuff isn't working, he was so used to just being like, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I always do and do it harder, right? Like Malone, he would experiment sometimes, but he was kind of like, this is who I am. This is what's worked. We're going to keep doing it. I'll give you a good example of like why adaptation is important. Rick Carlisle has been a good coach for a long time, coached the Pistons up. He was the championship coach for the Mavericks. And then, once Dirk retired and they went to the Luca era, he didn't really vibe with Luca that well. Like, obviously, Luca's a great player. But if you remember, like when he left Dallas, one, it was kind of a surprise and it wasn't framed as a firing, but I'm pretty sure that was like a very mutual split. Like they were very like he was cool with leaving and they were cool with having him leave because I think Carlisle was just so stubborn. And I think most people were kind of like, well, is he going to coach again? Is he going to be any good? And I think he's proven now with the Pacers that he's taken a lot of the good things he's done, but also learned from that experience of being like, you know what? Maybe I can't be such of a hard ass with this generation. Because if you remember, he like famously clashed with players all the time. Like Rondo, it was a disaster. Um, I haven't heard any of those stories about him in Indiana. And obviously he's got that team playing great in the finals. So I just think that kind of shows like coaches can evolve, but just because you win a championship doesn't mean you should stop evolving. So I'm not saying necessarily that that's what Malone did, but I do think it's easier for him to hide behind the fact that, like, I won a championship. Like, listen to me, I'm right. And I also don't know how many people on his staff were willing to like tell him, like, hey, you're wrong, or I disagree. Maybe they did.
Mm.
I honestly don't know. I'm just asking the question. I'm not saying for sure, like, he was the head guy and like everything he says goes. He ruled with iron fist, but it also wouldn't surprise me if that was the case because we heard a lot of the articles and as some people like to say hit pieces that came out once the double Booth and Malone firing came out. But I think that even the biggest Malone defender would have to admit that he at least did play a part in that toxicity that was happening in that organization, right? Like I'll admit that even though I'm a Malone defender because it's like this is what Calvin Booth has given you, and you're going to have to work with it instead of just complaining every day. And then, like, third game into the season, basically complains, like, yeah, it'd be nice to have KCP. It's like, yes, Mike, we all know that. But like saying that publicly, one is throwing your GM under the bus, and two is kind of like it's like semi throwing your players under the bus, right? So I think sometimes Malone says stuff that pisses us off, but it's also like he's doing it in a self-serving way, right? It's like he's planting the seed of if things go wrong, I know why they're going to go wrong, and it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my decision. And even if he's right, that is like the immature and wrong way to approach things as a head coach, right? It's like I get not wanting to take responsibility for decisions that Calvin Booth made that you disagree with, but it's still immature to like publicly disagree with it, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I actually thought it was like responsible by Kroenke to fire both guys, because it's kind of like you can't really pick one guy there. You kind of have to be like, you guys both dropped the ball here, And then he also did take some ownership as well, saying like, I let this fester too long. I wasn't around enough, which is like a cool thing to say. But then it's also like, what are you going to do about it, right? Because I think, as we start to move forward here, you kind of have to wonder, did he learn anything from this? He says he did, but we're going to see, right? He already hired Adelman first, and I think Matt Moore did a great job outlining why that's a really like risky move to hire the head coach before the GM. Um,
Right after the conflict. Yeah.
yeah, but
Where
before we move forward, because I do think there's a lot of things to talk about. I just want to like kind of review the series a little more. Is there anything that like surprised you or stood out to you, or anything you want to talk about? Because I have a rant lined up, but I want to get your thoughts on the series first.
um I mean I feel I don't want to say they did all they could, but I do think, so much of what I think is determining a lot of the matchups these days in the playoffs is injury luck. It's really unfortunate. I think situation with Mike. I think that's tough. But even in that context, I thought they fought hard. Um, I I want to let you go. I do have I think it's that I have systemic critiques of the team that I think were kind of exposed by OKC, mainly in how Denver can respond to physicality, especially from the perimeter, and something that they are struggling to accomplish. But um, I want to let you, I kind of want to let you go before I I wander into any lanes you might be trying to enter.
Okay, so whenever a team loses, there's usually a fall guy, right? Or multiple fall guys. I would say the two guys that get the most shit on the Nuggets are Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., right? Now, even as a Michael Porter Jr. defender, I will admit the last three playoffs have pretty much not been great. Like his numbers, they drop off in the playoffs. This year, it was tough. He's got the shoulder injury that happens in the Thunder series. But even before that, he didn't really play well in the Clippers series because, like, right around the All-Star break, he was playing really well. And then he played horrible after the All-Star break. We're like, what's going on? He said he pulled the hamstring or whatever. We're like, oh, maybe this is taking longer to heal than we thought. Then he admits to us at the end of the season press conference that his brace broke on his foot where he developed drop foot, and he was never able to get another one that fit comfortably, and that kept him out of rhythm. And when I heard that, I'm not gonna lie, I was pissed because I feel like this part of the Nuggets season was criminally under talked about. And here's why. This is your starting small forward. He's on a max contract. You're an NBA organization. You spend over 150 million, almost 200 million dollars on your roster. You're telling me you can't find this guy a brace that fits properly? You can't get the equipment that one of your main guns needs to be successful at his job. I don't care what the excuses are. They stopped making the brace, whatever. Like it should have been priority number one to make sure you get Mike the brace that he needs to be successful. So it's not even like I'm blaming Porter for saying like it's a weak excuse or whatever. I know some people probably might think that, but I think this is an organizational failure, flat out. You know, if a guy, I mean, honestly, Ray, I'm stunned. I've never heard of this happening before. We've heard of like surgeries going wrong. We've heard of like
Mhm.
treatments not working, right? Like Lonzo Ball is a great example of like the doctors didn't know what was going on for years. And now I guess he's good because they tried some type of like surgery that had never been done before. So I guess Lonzo finally, after like multiple surgeries and trial and error, his knees are good, but not having the right equipment for an NBA player, it blows my mind. If this was like 1965, I might understand. It's 2025, and you're telling me he can't find the right brace to be comfortable. It's just like it's little things like this that make me think the Nuggets are still an unserious organization. You know, it's like they won a championship because Jokic is so great, but they still don't operate like an A-level team. I mean, I really don't want to talk about the practice facility situation today, but to me, this is like a symptom of that, right? It's like,
There's
oh,
the whole narrative
it's like
to
figure it out,
fit into.
or you know, like I just feel like people moved on from this story so quickly, like, oh, that's a bummer. I feel like if he was like the Lakers starting small forward, this would have been a way bigger story. You know, obviously because it's the Lakers, but also because it's like, are you kidding me? Like this is the kind of thing that the typical NBA star would look at and go, "You didn't have what my teammate needed to play his best. Are you guys serious? Like, I might be out here." And I'm not even trying to go down the dark path of like Jokic is going to ask out or anything. It's more just like this is another, you know, another thing to write down in like the bad section.
The obituary.
So yeah, that's basically my rant there is like, yeah, Porter played bad, but it's also like if he's admitting that he didn't have the right brace, how does that happen? Like that can't happen.
He also didn't play. He, I thought he played well given the circumstance. Like the games he got the shot, he played well. The games he didn't get the shot, and the game seven that I think he probably got the shot sooner maybe than he should have. Um, I thought he played poorly, and Jamal Murray really can't create for himself against like high level defense. And that's not. I'm not saying he's a bad player. I'm not saying Mike's a bad player. But they both have these limitations. Um, I understand the desire to move on from either one or both. I just I do want to circle back to the coaching a little bit before we go to like the roster changes specifically.
Sure.
But I do think, in terms of the series, they, that's what the playoffs do. The Nuggets show you what your weaknesses are. Whether you're Christian Brown shooting like 30% from three, I think he did in the playoffs, or I don't know what you want to call Peyton Watson, not being on the floor, not being trustworthy enough. I guess you can want to call it that because he didn't touch the floor as much as he might have wanted to. And that's, defensive reasons. That's like not defensive reasons, but the lapses. I think people don't like missed layups. People don't like, even though I think that he did okay. The lack of like any kind of backup center option, and I know people are like, oh, well, we have Aaron Gordon or these other guys, but I don't know how many times we can try. Hey, let's find a power forward and have him play center, and it'd be okay. But I think there's a lot of like small things from having support for the players to recognizing your own systemic weaknesses that I think the Nuggets could kind of go into the offseason with and were shown. in that game. But going back to Malone a little bit, I feel like he carries a lot of the scars of the Sacramento experience, just in terms of aspiring there and coming into Denver. I think being the son of a coach as well, and kind of having that perspective of more, I think more in his ear. If, for example, if Peyton Watson has Gilbert Arenas in his ear, and that kind of like player perspective really echoed into him, I'm sure Michael Malone also has the coach's sort of perspective echoed into him, and it's one that I think largely exists in a way of the NBA is not fair to me. Why don't you give me the best team in the league and I'll win a championship? And I think you see that a lot with teams. With some coaches, even like similar to him. I think Tibbs, kind of a similar position. I'm not saying they're the same coach, but they do have a relationship. They do share a lot of similar, I would say, virtues, and I
They're
think
both
also
they're
maybe,
both from the Van Gundy tree.
yeah, yeah, a certain school and perspective of coaching. And I think he always coached with a mind and an eye for creating the narrative that I'm not going to get fired, or if I do get fired, I want it to make sure that it can't be perceived as my fault. And I think
Yeah.
there's a saying we have. I don't know who says it and who doesn't say it. It's just something I've heard a lot in my life. It's scared money don't make no money. And what does that mean? Is that like if you're going to move through the game in this like defensive way, I think you're going to limit yourself as a coach. And I think that's largely what happens with him is that he was so focused on building that narrative that he did things that hurt the team. Um, and so that people don't come for my neck, I have to be fair. And I have to also say, Calvin Booth doesn't strike me as a. I think there are some workplaces that are more. Your standing in that workplace is about your ability to do the job. Like I've done contracting before, for example, we remodel kitchens. Nobody's asking me how my candor is and my yeses, nos, and thank yous. They're just wondering, can I, punch in these floorboards? I also think there are a lot of environments where it's kind of the opposite, where that a lot of that the niceties and how you say something is almost more important, becomes more important than the work itself. And I think Calvin Booth, I think he knows ball. Like I think I just in the same way that I want to give Malone that credit, I think he's good coach. I think Calvin Booth knows ball. That the players that he drafted, the choices he mostly. I don't love the Jamal extension. That's more of a contract negotiation thing. But in terms of like, oh, I believe in this player, I don't believe in that player. I think he has a pretty good eye for that. But he wasn't Tim Connolly in the way that Tim Connolly, I think, had that
Right.
understanding of like how to rub elbows in a more of a social way that like
Right.
ended up meant he's not going to back down from engaging in the beef in the way that other GMs might have. And yeah, I think that conflict hurt the players.
Yes.
I think that's something that is most interesting to me is that like, okay, now that it's over, can we get a new perspective on, talking about David Adelman? Um, and can he keep everything together? I mean, obviously they just had a big boost going into the playoffs, but are they still going to listen to him a year from now, or was he just like, oh, finally we don't have this guy yelling at us? Is this like a substitute teacher becomes the main teacher type of thing, where now we feel like we can take some liberties? Um, or can he, get more out of the roster in a way that Michael Malone did not?
I mean, I think that's a fascinating question, right? Because I mean, time will tell. But you know, back to the Booth Malone Cold War, I think that one thing we don't always consider is whether Malone is right or not about, if a player is good enough or if they have it. When you know that a coach doesn't have your back or like doesn't think you can do it, it's so much harder to succeed, right? Like obviously these guys all have confidence, they're good basketball players, they made it to the NBA. But like you can't tell me Peyton Watson and Michael Malone had a great relationship. That was a Calvin Booth pick. He got benched in the playoffs last year. It was visibly upset. I'm not saying it was the wrong move. Justin Holiday played great, but I just wonder if Malone being gone is like a refresher to some of the young players on the roster. And I know I always talk about like making a change just to make a change doesn't make sense because the grass isn't always greener.
Hmm.
That's still true, but it's also true that if there's tension, if you remove the guy causing the tension or perceived to be causing the tension, then it is like a fresh start for a lot of these guys. And I don't know if there's anybody on the roster that's like, ah man, Moch is gone, like he had my back, like now I'm screwed. Because I think even Jamal, who is probably like the number one player for like Malone always having his back, I think Adelman's, talked about him glowingly too. He respects him a lot. Seems like a good relationship there. So I think Booth being gone is kind of like, that might help some of the guys on the roster that Booth wasn't crazy about, because I think I don't know if it's like a secret anymore, but like Booth tried to trade Jamal last summer. Kroenke shut it down. So, you know, that's that's like the sort of underlying secret about why the vibes were so bad this year is like Gordon and Murray didn't get extended until like pretty late in the summer. Do you remember? Didn't Shams tweet like, "Oh, the Nuggets are going to extend Murray," and then it didn't happen for like another 3 or 4 weeks. I don't remember the exact timeline, but like it took longer than we were expecting. So
I did not hear about like him actively trying to trade Jamal. That
I,
wouldn't surprise me because I found the extension questionable. Not to say I don't think he should have been
he
extended,
was.
but I think the
I'm
size of
not.
the extension.
I'm not reporting that Jamal was offered. It was more like a gauging trade value discussions.
Hmm.
So that can be perceived in multiple ways because like some people would say like, well, it's your diligence to always know like the value of your guys, which is fair. But I'm telling you, I think Booth was looking to get off Jamal. um
I would understand that. Like I think in the circumstance, and because I feel a similar way about. I mean, again, we'll probably talk about this later, but I feel that way about Christian Brown a little bit. Is that like if when you get to that point of and maybe we can transition into like some of the lessons from the season as a whole, if you don't mind. But um, I'll make an NFL analogy, I guess, is that I think the second apron operates a lot more like a hard cap on spending. It's not like cement, but it's very firm in the way that teams are navigating that. And I think NFL teams are a lot more similar in that they operate in that way with a hard cap on what you can spend on players. And so it creates a dynamic where you're constantly, it's not just about your willingness to pay, which is, I think, more true in sports like international football, like soccer, and baseball, where if your owner just has the money and they're willing to spend into the stratosphere, look, you can
yeah,
build championship teams and you can sustain that, and that's going to be productive. But in the NFL, you have to be constantly scrutinizing yourself and your team and even your own players as far as like, when I give you this extension, is the production going to be coming at market value, above market value, or below market value? And that often ends up meaning some of the smartest things you can do. And what you really see with some of the most successful NFL teams, I think about this, not that I'm biased as a Ravens fan, but I've been watching that for 20 some odd years. I know what that looks like. I know what it looks like to have a GM and a coach and an assistant GM, like a successor, and all of that be synergistic. Is that you might have to trade a guy you like before you extend him because the extension that he might agree to is probably going to put him in a position where you're paying him more than that production is really worth. And that's not that
Talking about
Jamal is
the Bill
bad.
Belichick trade him a year early versus a year too late, right?
Exactly. It's not that Jamal is a bad player. So I'm not saying I'm confirming what you're saying that, oh, he definitely tried to trade him or was engaged in trade value being calls or whatever. I don't know. But I think if he's thinking about it from that lens, it makes a lot of sense. Um, because now I think it's a lot harder if you're going to, now that we're like, the team
Right.
is
This
not
is
built
basically
correctly.
the
We don't
team.
have a second
This
star.
is there's not a lot of flexibility with this roster. As Grace pointed out in our article recently, it's like the Nuggets talked about wanting flexibility. Where is it?
And it kind of went out the window when you gave Jamal that extension.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike's contract, okay, it's the first max, which I still think is different than the second max, but it's also almost over. And Jamal's contract would have been, I think you would have had that, like, if you wanted to go out and go for insert second option here. I don't, I'm not going to pretend I know who is not available, especially after the Luka trade. But if you're going to go for that, that would have been easier. Um, but I'll ask you this: now that we are at this point, so the season is over, they're kind of disappointing. Where do you feel like we should go, or hope the Nuggets go from a roster construction perspective?
Yeah. So this is kind of like back-to-back off seasons now where they've told us kind of what they want to do and are going to do. They basically like told us that they're not going to bring KCP back, and they kept their promise on that. And now they're basically telling us that they're going to run it back and develop internally. And I think a lot of Nuggets fans are disappointed in that. I get it though, because I'm still on the side of like I think the starters are good enough. I really do. They were plus what, like 35 or 45 in the OKC series, I forget. And we our bench is just awful. Like they got to figure out how to upgrade that. Dron Holmes is going to be healthy. You hope that he's a player. You hope that you can sign either Bruce Brown or like a decent free agent, and then see what you got and go from there. And I think the thing that worries me the most, Ray, is Kroenke said in his press conference that he's going to look, everywhere for a new GM. He's going to maybe even consult like a firm or whatever and, do his due diligence to get the best candidate for the job. And I have absolutely no idea what's going on there right now. Are they interviewing people outside of their organization or not? Because to me, what it seems like, if they already know what they want to do, which is like not change all that much, then wouldn't it be counterintuitive to bring in somebody from the outside who can like look at your organization up and down with like an unbiased view and be like, you guys are doing this really well and you guys can improve in these areas? If they just promote Tenzer or Balcetis, like I like those guys, I do think they're sharp guys. How does that change anything? So it's like a very confused message to me about like, oh, we want to be better. We know we can improve some things, but you just keep promoting from within. So it's like Josh kind of went out of his way to like tell us how smart Ben Tenzer is, which is cool and all, but isn't it also like, if you don't have fresh eyes and fresh ideas and you just hire from within, doesn't that make it harder to see your blind spots? Because I mean, that's something we talked about with Tim Connolly for years, right? Is like he was too afraid to make trades or just understand the trade market because he like overvalued his own guys. So even though I like continuity, I think sometimes there's just What's the saying? Like, if you're too close to the fire, you get burned or something like that. It's just, I don't know if they have enough people in the organization that are willing to be like, this needs to change, or like this guy isn't working out, because it's like you want your draft picks to work out. I get that. Everybody does.
Mhm.
But at some point you have to be like, is Strother and Watson worth it? Like, can we develop these guys to be better? And so I get that that's plan A. It should be. I just hope that if it's not going great by the trade deadline, they don't sit on their hands again.
I'm afraid of the reactionary trade.
You're afraid of reactionary trade?
Yeah, I'm afraid that they will make a trade because they are like, we need to make a trade, and that's most of it. Like,
Yeah.
I want them to get better, right? And I wish they did have a GM already. I think for a lot of the reasons that we mentioned, just avoiding the same kind of dynamic that you existed in, where you have an incumbent coach and a GM who's been put in a position to kind of navigate what the incumbent coach already is doing. But more importantly, I think the draft is a few weeks away, and it will be nice if you just. I'm not saying you have to make a trade because, again, my big fear is the reactionary trade. But it would be nice if you were able to do your due diligence about maybe you want to make a move, maybe you want to get into the draft, maybe you want to facilitate something that somebody else is doing, and that nets you some value somewhere. Maybe you want to kick the tires and cut Hunter Tyson or trade Hunter Tyson for like the 58th pick in the draft and just pick somebody else. Um, I'm not even saying it has to be a big move. It's just like it'll be nice if you had that like agreed upon coherence, because you're right. You might bring somebody in and they have a totally different idea set about the valuation of the players and the vision that you should have, and that's, I think, really concerning for that kind of synergy that we've been talking about. Um, but I
Yeah.
don't think the big moves have to come like immediately either. I think they have some time, at least in the sense that they're in a better position than the Bucks were. If you want to call it two different approaches to retooling a title contender, is that like the Bucks really answers like, hey, I need y'all to do something, and then they did something, and it didn't make them better. And then Giannis was like, I need y'all to do something more, and it still didn't make them better. They still at least have some of that powder dry, and I'm not saying they have a ton of flexibility, but Michael Porter's an expiring next year. And while I don't think Jamal Murray's value is like increasing necessarily, I think if he's having a good season and he hasn't had a bad injury history, I do think the playoffs he just had were better than the playoffs that he had a season ago. So that's at least a positive, I think. And you find the right moment, you can maybe swing that trade that does net you the next star, or you can find them enough support to cover up the weaknesses that you can kind of get over the hump to the extent that they need that much more help, because it's not that much, right? They did just push OKC to 7 games.
Yeah. Can you pull up this latest comment by Grace here? I think this is a fascinating point. Josh Kroenke doesn't actually want outside scrutiny. The message is just for optics. If
That
that's
might
true,
be
that scares the shit out of me. I don't know about you, but that's horrible if that's true.
it's tough because like you also don't want to look desperate. You don't want to look like,
How
oh,
is
we're
firing
doing the fire
someone inside the
sale.
organization desperate?
It's just to say that like if Denver brought in somebody and they were like, we need this guy and he has like a new vision and we need to like go, go, go. I'm not mad if they're gonna do that, if they are looking for shifts in perspective, from a roster building standpoint. I would rather they held those cards. I would rather they like shucked and jived as if they love their guy still, from that perspective, is that like I don't want them to be like, nah, we're making big changes this offseason and,
Right.
project that energy too soon. So but it could be either way. It could be like a negative, as Grace was mentioning, that Josh is really looking that the lesson that he learned from all this is that he needs to be more engaged. That, oh, because that, as okay, as long as I kind of like am a regular impact on the organization and I kind of keep up and touch base and make sure everything is going the way that I see fit, that it'll be fine. I don't know if I love that. Um, and if they do that and they want someone who's just going to be like a mouthpiece, I do think that that can also be, you know, harmful as well. You just kind of got to get it right.
I think I think we need to consider that I do think there's a middle ground here, Ray. I think there's a middle ground between running it back and between making major changes. And what I mean is if you bring in from the out somebody from the outside, they could at least say, okay, I see your vision. I think you have 5 or 6 really good players, but let's at least be open to listening to offers or, improving the team if we can. So I'm not saying just make a move to make a move, but I do think there's been times in Nuggets history when maybe there were decent offers available and they were just too scared to pull the trigger. Um, Obviously, we don't like how it ended the year after, but I thought the Iguodala trade, if you've been a Nuggets fan long enough to remember this, was a really good example of the Nuggets sort of, getting a good player as part of a larger deal that they were just kind of like on the silence for. I mean, they gave up a Flalo to get Iguodala, and then they won 57 games. So I know you're making a face right now because he left the following year, but the point
I
is,
hate Andre Iguodala. There isn't one player I hate more than Andre Iguodala as a Nuggets fan. I'm not gonna lie, I hate him
I
more than
know,
Melo. I don't know
I
why
know
y'all hate Melo so much, but
Iguodala.
Andre Iguodala, literal traitor, literal traitor. I don't care.
I'm not
Anyway,
defending Iggy. I'm
continue.
simply pointing out the example of that trade. Do you at least understand that I'm saying if there's like
Yeah, yeah.
if the NBA gets crazy this summer, if
The
somebody
Aaron Gordon
calls
trade
the
was
Nuggets,
also
they
like
can't
this.
just sit on their hands and be like, "No, we're cool with running it back." If there's like a good player that needs to get offloaded and Denver is like the team that could take him, they should listen. So I'm not saying those guys aren't listening at all, but it just seems like the messaging to the fan base has been very much like, don't expect anything big, which is fine and reasonable. But I think they really need to continue to like just look under every stone, right? Like at least see what is available because I think we've learned that every guy is gettable for the right price. You just have to determine what price are you willing to deal with. So, I mean, the Pelicans basically said fire sale. You know, their owner's cheap. She doesn't know ball. I probably know more ball than her. Not probably. I do. Um, but that doesn't matter because I don't have money the way she does. So, they're just trying to save money. They traded Ingram for Bruce Brown, which was hilarious that the Raptors then gave him that deal. But of course, as soon as that report came out, people started putting Trey Murphy in a Nuggets jersey, which was also hilarious. Um, but it doesn't hurt to call, right? You just say, hey, who's available? What would it take to get blah, blah, blah? And even if it goes nowhere, now you at least have an idea of like, okay, if we can work the first half of the season with increasing certain guys' trade value, then maybe you can trade them at peak value. I think that's what's been so frustrating with the Zeke Naji experience is like Malone wouldn't play him early on, which one stunted his development, but two like didn't make it look like he'd be attractive to other teams. So I know that's kind of like a two-way street. Like if you don't play well, then obviously you're not going to be attractive, but you also kind of need the chance to play well. So I don't know. The Nuggets have done a lot of things wrong with the Zeke Naji experience, as Grace eloquently put in her article. But yeah, I just want them to be more open, be more active. Who knows what
Yeah,
their plans are? Who knows what players they're specifically targeting in free agency or on the trade market? But when they say run it back, I just hope they don't mean like re-sign Jordan and Chanchar, because those two guys can't contribute flat out. Like they need some new blood on this roster.
I mean, if Vlatko is healthy, I don't really mind.
Oh,
DJ is 39 years old or something like that. I don't know. I'm not mad about DJ. I just the idea that you can just hire like guys in their late 30s in the NBA and expect them to be like like meaningful long-term contributors, I'm kind of over that. Um, I don't know how many minimum guys you're going to get who are good.
right.
That's also something I think about. Um, but I do agree with you that like being open-minded, especially when it comes to players that we love. Look, I like Jamal, I like Mike, but I also think if you had to give up two of those guys, if you have to include, I would include Aaron Gordon in the trade if it meant you could get that like true second option. That's just how I feel. For even at a lower level, maybe, if we're talking about this like 1 year too soon, not 2 years too late, if you wanted to move Christian Brown and somebody for, I like Christian, we all like Christian, but if you could not pay him $30 million a year and get some amount of value back, I think that would be helpful. And I think all of that, you could think about that across the roster too. You could think about that with Strawther, you could think about that with Watson. And at the bottom of it, can Adelman, yeah, have a new perspective on guys like Zeke, on you might not love this. I feel like they could probably get more out of Dario than they did last season. If the goal is to just get off his contract, especially just like 2 weeks of making him look usable
Yeah.
could go so far, you know. And I'll always look back at this. He had a positive lineup. It was with Jamal Murray.
Yeah.
And I think that made a lot of sense when you think about why you would bring in Dario Saric. It's not to play next to Jokic. That was dumb. Um, it's that you can have Jokic go sit down and you can still run a dribble handoff. And maybe it's more than about Jamal Murray taking that shot than it is about getting Dario the ball back. But like that's fine. You get to use the same format, the same um, sort of like set of plays. And the same thing for Zeke. Like obviously Zeke isn't Aaron Gordon, but can he play defense? Can he kind of fill in as like his understudy a little bit for like 2, 3 weeks? And you see that, and you're like, oh, maybe you're like, you sit him down. David sits him down. He's like, hey man, I actually believe in you, and he gives him the hug where he wants to be, and pats him on the butt. He goes out there and shoots 37% from three. You might have, you might have some options at the trade deadline instead of,
That would be nice.
whatever they did last season. So that's how I feel. I don't expect too much that's going to be huge. And can I also talk about the trade machine was a mistake.
Yeah.
Never should have been created.
Corners.
I feel like it has been one of the worst things for NBA. Just it made rosterization too easy. That's what that's my stand. That's my takeaway from this year. I'm just like, no, y'all are too quick with it. You're too willing to go to be like boop boop boop. Oh, this worked in the trade machine. Oh, this happened. I'm like, you don't know. You just everybody wants to pretend they know what happens in the phone call and wants to pretend they know like who is available and who's not available with what their value is and what their value isn't. And
Yeah.
I just and who you can sign in the off season. I think that's another thing. Kind of coming back to the ownership stuff. I don't know if I still think it's not the most attractive thing to come to Denver. I'm not saying that Denver sucks as a city. I
Right.
live here, obviously. Um, However, you're not going to get paid a lot. If you're big, it kind of looks like a graveyard. I can't imagine agents are really excited to call their guys and be like, "Oh, I got this great opportunity for you. You can come back up Nikola Jokic." Everyone who's done this have looked great. They've all looked awful.
It's true.
They've all looked
Probably
awful.
the worst job in the NBA, to be honest.
It might be one of the worst jobs in the NBA. I'm hoping that can change with Dave Adelman, but yeah. So it's if you don't have a great opportunity set, like you're not going to come in, prove you can make a bunch of can you're not going to come in and get a big. You go to the Wizards, right? You Kyle
Wizards.
Kuzma. You go to the Wizards. You put up 20 points a game. You look like you're something. You get a bag. You get a bag in the off season. You live in a cool city. You can go up to New York or to Miami or really conveniently. It's all there for you. Plumlee did Plumlee did look good. That was the last time Denver had a good backup center, and I think that's an important thing to think about is that Plumlee and Monte Morris could run an offense. Plumlee's not good. I'm not saying I'm never going to tell you Mason Plumlee is good
He
at
knew his role.
basketball, but he not only did he know his role, but he was a center, like like 7 feet tall and sets like real screens. And when you roll, you can throw him an alley oop, and he's not going to get. You're not going to. Zeke is a center. You know, throw Zeke an alley oop. He's not getting up there. He's already not. He's not tall enough, and he's not the athlete. So I'm just saying, you pair a smart player who maybe even if he lacks physical gifts like Monte did, like some other point guards on the NBA on the Nuggets roster. I'm not saying it has to be Jalen Pickett. It could be somebody else. But if you can just run a simple pick and roll, that's fine. And I think that gives you such a structure for how you can move about, and a rotation. Uh, DJ looked fine too. He's just watched. You can't play through watched players. Uh, that's part of it. They don't do that much. Like Justin Holiday, I think Justin Holiday looked good in Denver because he played like not a whole lot.
Yeah.
It was that he got mitigated.
He knew his
That
role.
and he kind of like wasn't pushed into a big role. You can let them chill.
I mean, Ray, we're almost at an hour here. It's been kind of negative, so I want to at least talk about some
How could
positive
it be
things that
possible?
happened this year. There were some good things that happened. So, I mean,
Okay.
Christian Brown, I think he passed the test, right? There were some skeptics of him being a starter. Yeah,
Yes and no.
we want him to improve, but I mean, the starting lineup was still good with him. So I'm a little upset that he kind of regressed on defense this year. I'm not really sure if you have any theories as to why. Maybe just more usage, but I
Yeah, I
thought,
think his offensive work well.
yeah, I thought we'd get a little more of him on defensive end. But he was still a good energy player, hustled a lot, got better at finishing. Um, I thought Gordon, improving his shooting really helped a lot, as we saw in games and also in playoff wins. Jokic obviously averages a triple double, almost a 30-point triple double. Has his best season ever, even though he doesn't win MVP, which is kind of funny. That's like the most Jokic thing ever, right? Like keep getting better and then you're not the best.
Everyone was like, we don't want him to win MVP.
Yeah.
No, no,
Well,
because then we're not going to win the finals, guys. The MVPs don't win. I'm like, now we got neither.
yeah. And then also like off the court, the Nuggets, they sold out every single game this year. I don't know if they've ever done that or when the last time that was. So Nuggets fandom is at an all-time high. Like even if it's, kind of been delayed, the championship has still sort of this era has birthed a new era of Nuggets fans, which is cool to see because I think there's a lot of people that they grow up, maybe they're taught the Nuggets from their mom or their dad, and they love it their whole life. But there's also, I know for a fact, plenty of people in Denver who didn't really care about the Nuggets for however many years, and the Jokic era is the team that got them into the Nuggets. So it's cool that Nuggets fandom's at an all-time high, and they are finally back on Comcast now, which is also a major win. So I think, even though these last 2 seasons have ended in playoff disappointment, I think that I think the city is still behind the team and behind most of our players. And you know what? People are gonna come at me now because this may be like the Buckets kiss of death, but I'm gonna predict a career year for Jamal Murray next year. There, I said it.
Why?
Because he ended the season healthy and he doesn't have to play for Canada this summer.
You think this is the year?
I think he's going to come into camp semi in shape and not need 2 months to work himself into game shape.
Maybe. I mean, okay, here's the thing. I would love it. I would love to see this. It's just,
I'm not saying he's going to be a killer. I'm just saying we're getting regular Murray earlier.
if $200 million can get you to come to camp in shape, if like, what is it? What is it at like 8, 9 years of criticism couldn't get you to come to camp in shape? I don't know. I don't, I can't,
This is
I
the year.
can't in my heart. This is like, you ever in a relationship and like, I don't know, they forget your birthday and they forget your birthday like the first year. And then they forget your birthday for like 6 more years.
I don't like where this is going.
I'm not gonna assume that they're gonna remember my birthday, but I hope they do.
I'm not putting any bets on this. This is just my homer positive prediction.
I mean I appreciate it. Okay, I can do Homer positive prediction. Peyton Watson breakout year. Let's go.
Whoa, that's bolder to me.
Zeke being a rotation player, I think is probably.
That's just a mean question. Come on now.
I think Zeke is closer to being a rotation player than Jamal is to coming into camp in shape.
That's so disappointing, but I can't really argue.
Sorry. I mean, I'm optimistic about the guys, actually. Pretty. Hmm. Mike had a career year, I think, in a way. Put up his highest point total in terms of points per game since I want to say 2019.
Played well.
He played 70 plus games for the last 2 years. People can talk a lot about, oh, he isn't this and he isn't that, but he is available. And some guys aren't, like Jamal Murray, just being available consistently. And I think I might like it if he played a little bit less just to preserve himself. But I think he expands. What's up?
We should probably wrap up soon, but you didn't give me like who do you want this summer? Like I would love to have Bruce Brown back if we can get him. I'd be happy with that. Is there any free agents you're dry on?
Give me Bruce and the backup center.
Okay.
And I need like a center, not a power, not like not 230, not 6 out. I need someone genuinely large who says genuine. You know what I mean? They don't have to be good. They don't have to be good. Okay. Just set a screen, rebound, dunk. Don't be 38 years old. That's all I'm asking. That's all I need.
That's your post the job application for Nuggets backup center. I like it.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I don't know. I think they'll be okay. I think they're gonna have a good at least a good regular season next year. I'm optimistic. A lot of those guys will take steps forward. A lot of those guys talk about the young guys have playoff experience now. I think that'll be really useful. Even if Peyton Watson doesn't, go to the gym in Denver every day. Did you see he has a basketball camp?
Yeah, I did.
Good. Did you see that he noted himself as an NBA guard?
I missed that, but we'll keep working on that handle, buddy.
I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people see that as him being selfish. I think he's just more accurate. Like I don't think it's that personal.
I mean, they do put him at the 2 in plenty of lineups, so I don't really have a problem with
There's a
that.
lot of in the same way that like Christian Brown has this dynamic of he's big at the 2 and kind of small at the 3. I think
Hayden's
Page
more of
is
a 2 than a 4 to me.
exactly. And I'm not saying that if he's because him, I think a lot of people see him saying that as like, oh, you're selfish, you're saying this for your reasons, and you. I mean, okay, maybe it is better for him, but also like it's better. It's better for the team if he plays well and he's productive. There shouldn't be this like. There's a weird dynamic where like people don't want what's best for the player if it even if it means that's also what's best for the team.
Yeah.
I don't know. Um, you still know what you need to do if you're Peyton Watson. You know, if you're Jalen Pickett, you still kind of know. Okay, you got played off the floor. You know what to do. Julian, you kind of know what you need to do. More of what you did. Um, go do the work. It's summertime.
Yeah. Well,
Jabal, you kind of know what you need to do.
I still think we're in a decent spot. I think, a few changes around the edges could make a difference. So I'll be excited to talk to you again, you know, after the draft and after free agency hits. And, they have to do something.
Yeah, they should
They
do
re-sign
something.
DJ and Vlaco, and that's it. That'd be very weird.
I would
I
be
have some
aghast.
new players on the Nuggets.
Just find me a random like international center.
Yeah,
Anyway, um, I have modeling and acting headshots.
there you go.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that. That's a positive note for me. Um, you're on land. That's a positive note for you. So
Huge.
hopefully we'll have more positive notes to come in the future. And yeah, kind of coming up to the 70-minute mark. We appreciate you if you've been listening to the show the whole time. And yeah, we'll be back soon in your feeds. Um, hopefully the Nuggets do things and we have more to talk about and they're not all negative. But yeah, at the end of the day, go Nuggets.
Go Nuggets.